Is a video game art?
It might have been the entry that got a lot of the series' current enthusiasts on board, but Fallout 3 is a bit of a touchy subject for fans of the post-apocalyptic series. To many, particularly those who weren't even aware what Fallout was before 3, it's seen as a fun ride or at least an enjoyable escape into a densely packed amusement park of a world. It's got tons of locations to explore, neat loot dotted around, and a smattering of quests both central and totally tangential to your main adventure. You can go check out an old supermarket for supplies, go off the beaten track and end up in a town swarmed by fire-breathing ants, take a stroll through a zombie-infested subway and end up lost in the labyrinthian city of ruined DC, stumble on a factory building guarded by automated drones, end up fighting alongside giant hulking soldiers against screeching armies of super mutants. Even going back to it, it's easy to see the appeal as you just sort of seamlessly drift from beat to beat, admittedly fighting against some awkward shooting controls that haven't aged super well, but still entirely capable of getting yourself on an ever-surprising capital wasteland adventure. Of course, there's a common thread to the examples I gave, and it's also the issue many of Fallout's more long-time fans have with the game. It's a shooting gallery more often than not. Now, I don't think this criticism should just be taken at face value because, let's be honest, Fallout 3 wasn't the first entry to have plenty of fighting, and even the more beloved entries of the franchise dipped their toes in the old combat arena loop. Even New Vegas, often cited as a return to what the franchise was really about, will see you tripping over giant mutant lizards, giant mutant scorpions, and regular mostly non-mutant raiders within the first half hour of the game. But what is the franchise really about, and why do people think entries like New Vegas do such a better job of capturing it? Well, that's best illustrated by the original subtitle that very first game was sold with, Fallout, a post-nuclear role-playing game. Fallout was, and is to many series devotees, a franchise about creating a character for yourself, making choices, and helping shape the world around you with a series of engaging, often thought-provoking quests. The divide between this and the sort of Fallout we got with 3 is as simple as looking at the perspective through which you see the world. In the original games, you're a tiny speck with the focus very much on this rich and detailed world around you. As of Fallout 3, you're essentially a walking gun clicking the heads of whatever foe happens upon you, sometimes given the opportunity to at least choose which guy's head you want to click
Okay,
on.
I can still blow a megaton though.
Of all the little sidetracks you get caught on in the game, there's actually surprisingly few that result in the player making a real choice about the outcome of a situation. The choices are more geared around what you're doing moment to moment, whether it be sniping enemies from a distance or blowing them to smithereens with a miniature WMD. Mostly, all those choices add up to rooms filled with blood and gibs, you the eternal victor. These sorts of anxieties are echoed even by Tim Kaine himself, one of Fallout's lead creators, who once stated, "When I finished Fallout, I was exhausted and tired of Fallout. People second-guessed what was good for the game, and they wanted in on it, since it looked like the big thing now. My idea was to explore more of the world and more of the ethics of a post-nuclear world, not to make a better plasma gun." With all this said, I still want to clarify that this isn't as simple as Fallout used to be about making choices with you occasionally shooting things, and now it's a game about shooting things where you just occasionally make choices. From Tranquility Lane to Tenpenny Tower to the Replicated Man to the Wasteland Survival Guide, you'll often find the game asking you questions about the decisions you make that don't involve who you want to make into a big guts explosion. Even if, ultimately, those choices won't usually be the ones you'll be racking your head over for too long. Hey, do you want to give this very clearly thinking, feeling robot man up to his slave master for some money or not? Hey, do you want to poison basically the entire wasteland population or not do that? Hey, do you want to help the racists kill a bunch of ghouls or help the not racists not get killed? Oh wait, actually I guess that choice is made retroactively morally questionable because if you do help the not racists, they end up brutally murdering everyone, which... Okay. Not to oversimplify things, again, in New Vegas it's not all sunshine and rainbows, and there's certainly a few moral choices that really just come down to if you want to be an arsehole or not. Hey, you want to find out who killed this guy's wife so he can exact revenge, or just totally bullshit who did it for the sake of convenience?
You sick bastard.
You want to help these ghoul friends shoot off in their spaceships, or just be a dick and reprogram the ships to collide with each other? What New Vegas has on its side, however, just as with 1 and 2, is that its exploration of the various socio-political strifes that come with rebuilding a nation come packed with many much deeper philosophical questions about what you believe and prioritize as an individual. In one instance, a malfunctioning underground reactor is causing crops to die out at a local sharecropper's farm, but as you make your way to it, you discover the reactor is the only thing keeping alive some trapped residents down there. Their chances of survival are slim even with the reactor, but is it worth sacrificing them to benefit that above ground community? Rerouting energy from a nearby power facility, who most deserves it? The local military forces to help protect the area? The most deprived areas who could use the extra boost? Or maybe everyone deserves a little bit of power, even if that means frequent outages? What does charity really mean? A much beloved military general has been feeding misinformation, albeit for a justified reason. Is it worth turning him in and leaving him in disgrace, or letting the secret die with you? How important is duty? What is duty? All culminating in a genuinely tough question of who you'll side with for control of Hoover Dam and the Strip, the most important strategic positions in all of the Mojave Wasteland. Do you side with the established leader, a dictator but not an overtly monstrous one? Do you murder him in cold blood to cede power to the dominant military, a group that aims to protect himself while suffering from a litany of corruption from within? Maybe the most important thing to you is the sovereignty of the citizens and their right to a free state. Or you could side with the Legion, a strong and strict regime that... Okay, that one was a bit of a flub. Restrictions on development time leave them incredibly underdeveloped, so they're basically just a bunch of immoral, torturing, enslaving monsters. But for the most part, it's a far more interesting choice than anything offered in Fallout 3, a game which, as I said, culminates in the great moral decision of helping everyone get clean water or poisoning the water so almost everyone who drinks it dies. Head scratcher. So why am I posing this absurd suggestion that Fallout 3 might pose some legitimate moral quandaries? Am I clickbaiting? Well, yeah. But also, this is the experience I actually found myself having on playing through the DLCs that I'd missed last time around. Now, full clarification, I might have been softened up to be impressed by the poignance of this moment due to the expansions I'd gone into beforehand. Long story short, Operation Anchorage and Mothership Zeta encapsulate absolutely everything people dislike about Bethesda's Fallout reboot. In Operation Anchorage, you're sent into a virtual reality military training program in the hopes of discovering a code you can use to unlock a vault buried deep within an old abandoned facility. Once in the virtual reality program, you fight your way through Chinese soldiers in a recreation of one of the pivotal battles of Fallout's pre-war period. And then you fight through more Chinese soldiers. And then you fight through more Chinese soldiers. I am not exaggerating here when I say you do basically nothing in this game other than run along cliffside walkways shooting dudes. Branching paths? Well, at one point you can choose whether to go fight some dudes and then go fight some other dudes, or go fight some dudes and then go fight some other dudes. Intriguing lore? I mean, there's a couple of audio logs where an American soldier is scared of getting killed, I guess. Thought-provoking decisions? Late in the game you get to choose whether you want to go fight some Chineses with a couple of dudes, a dude and a robot, or one really good robot. Interesting characters? Well, there's this guy.
Good luck.
In Mothership Zeta, you're teleported onto an alien mothership and have to fight your way through hordes of aliens to gain control of the ship and teleport yourself back home. Bonus points for having at least more than one character you can actually interact with. This time there's a cowboy. But it's essentially the same thing. Go over here, kill some aliens, go over here, kill some aliens. No real choices, and all culminating in such thought-provoking final encounter dialogue as... Small side note, Mothership Zeta has just about the perfect encapsulation of how surface level Bethesda's understanding of meaningful choices is for the most part. So bear with me. There are two general alien types that you encounter in the game. Alien soldiers who fire at you on sight, and alien workers who just run around screaming unless you shoot them in the head. If you do so, as you can imagine, you get negative karma for killing a non-combatant. But wait, these guys are explicitly established multiple times to be kidnapping and brutally torturing to death hundreds upon hundreds of humans as part of their experiments. So they're massacring hundreds of people, including children, but killing them makes me a bad guy? Alright, Todd. Alright, Todd. Alright, Todd. Hopes were through the floor when I booted up the Pitt, and wouldn't you know it, you spend the first hour or so being taken prisoner and forced to fight your way through hordes of generic undead gremlin men called Trogs. The setup is at least somewhat interesting. You've been contracted to help free some slaves in the particularly radiated hellscape of post-apocalyptic Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh, what else is new? No, actually, from what I've heard, Pittsburgh is a lovely city with a thriving arts community, and I'd love to visit sometime. The reason this community of slaves exists is the same reason the city is filled with these gross, naked zombie dudes. A disease known as the troglodyte degeneration contagion has swept through the pit, turning people into mindless, rotting ghouls, with the only hope for a cure resting in the hands of a team of totalitarian raiders headed by the mysterious and charismatic Asher. Holding this bargaining chip of a cure over the populace allows Asher and company to control and bully these workers into following his orders, albeit with the promise that the most exceptional individuals will rise through the ranks and join the ruling class. What Asher employs as leader is pretty classic utilitarianism.
His focus is solely on maximizing the productivity of the community, heavily discouraging workers who want to do anything other than work, while incentivizing those who work the hardest. It's kind of a we're not going to slow down so you need to speed up type of thinking.
Enter the Lone Wanderer, who, for the purposes of Bethesda's Fallout, is essentially the Messiah. By the mechanical limits of these games, anything our player character sets their mind to accomplishing, they will accomplish, no matter how impractical or unrealistic a task to complete. In Operation Anchorage, you can essentially win a pivotal Great War conflict single-handedly. In Mothership Zeta, you can essentially dominate an entire advanced alien army over the course of a day or so. And in the Pit, you can become the city's most accomplished worker before the sun hits the horizon, or if you could see the sun through the horizon here. And this is perfect for the rebels who fired you, because it's your job to infiltrate Asher's inner circle and steal from him the cure and remove his one great bargaining chip. And so, you do. You make it to Asher, chat a bit, waltz over to the research lab, and there's the lead scientist and wife of Asher, Sandra Kundanika, not one to chat and seemingly busy caring for her infant child. No sign of a cure aside from some non-specific science-y stuff, so you investigate further. And that's right. The baby is the cure. Or at least, she seems to be the key to reverse engineering a cure, having an innate immunity to the disease and being the best lead the Raiders have in finally cultivating something that could combat the sickness. A prompt emerges with your choice. A choice that you might not have even considered until this moment.
Steal the cure? Or leave it with the Raiders?
Now, let's get into the mechanics of video game choices for a moment, because you might already have a light going off in your head like, oh, so they force you to steal a baby to get the cure? That's a bit cheap. And you're half right. So there's two things I want to flag up here, what I'll call choice softeners and choice hardeners. Yeah, okay, I'm really bad at naming things. Choice softeners mean anything that makes it easier for you to make a certain decision. Using Fallout, simple examples would be something like weapon choice. You do need to choose whether to use melee weapons, small guns, energy weapons, and so on, but the softener here is that every time you level up, you have the opportunity to dump some points into a different weapon specialization. So you realize that for the most part, your weapon choice wouldn't be final, you can change your mind later. A more complicated softener might be, say, choosing whether to purify the Capital Wasteland's water supply normally, or injecting a virus that targets and destroys anything sufficiently mutated. This choice might give you pause for thought. You've met sentient ghouls, they seem nice, but the wasteland is also littered with mindless, deadly, feral zombies and super mutants and all manner of bloodthirsty mutant beasts. Maybe it'd be for the best if you make those sacrifices? Then it turns out that basically everyone in the wasteland would be radiated enough to die from this virus. That's right, almost everyone you've interacted with in the game, short of isolated vault dwellers, would be killed by this stuff. And suddenly now the choice is way easier for you to make because you realize injecting the virus makes you a heartless mass murderer. By contrast, a choice hardener, someone please help me come up with better terms in the future, makes it more difficult to discern between multiple choices. If a game forced you to decide at the very beginning which weapon set you wanted to use, without the chance to swap out later on, that'd be a choice hardener. This is, incidentally, why a lot of players find it hard to decide the name or look of their character at the start of a game, even if it's ultimately not that important a thing. Realizing the finality of the decision makes it tougher to commit. And yes, the key to curing this troglodyte plague being an innocent tiny baby is also a choice hardener, and yeah, it's kind of cheap. I don't think this ruins it, however, not by any means, as you can see the ways it helps reaffirm the questions you're already being forced to grapple with.
This is fundamentally the point of a choice hardener. It's a way of taking a personal dilemma you may have and really forcing you to cement where your beliefs lie.
In this case, it goes back to all the things we've talked about briefly before. The many or the few, utility or compassion, order or chaos. Utilitarianism, as I mentioned before, is the guiding principle of Asher and his Raider clan. As put by pioneering scholar Jeremy Bentham, the greatest happiness of the greatest number. And that's what Asher wants. Eventually. The Pit is an abominable place, infested by disease, hardship, and a host of monstrous troll children. It's a difficult world, and as Asher's backstory reveals, he wants to do his part to turn it into something bearable. As a Brotherhood of Steel member, it was Asher's responsibility to clear out the Pit and possibly turn it into somewhere habitable, a mission known as the Scourge. He failed in this encounter and was presumed dead by his comrades. On awakening, he discovered scavengers had kept him from being torn to shreds, and so he decided to make it his duty to give them somewhere that might someday be bearable for them to live. As he saw it, the only way to possibly make this a reality was to build a powerful backbone of a workforce through harsh treatment, powerful incentives, and little in the way of compassion for the weak and lazy. And he, in many ways, succeeded. His community is the only reasonably safe community in the Pit. But is it worth it? Well, that's the big question of utilitarianism. As far as that ideology goes, the ends will nigh always justify the means. And to many, it's an ideology that just doesn't carry through. As Karl Marx once said,
applying this to man, he who would criticize all human acts, movements, relations, etc. by principle of utility must first deal with human nature in general, and then with human nature as modified in each historical epoch.
Utilitarianism often sets an arbitrary objective standard by which utility is measured, ignoring what might be considered useful by an individual. Utility of slavery, just as with child labour and poor work conditions, is well documented, and at this point we can generally agree that this is all ignorant of the fact that these people may value their personal autonomy, their individual freedom and liberty, well over the so-called greater good, which nearly always equates to nothing but greater comfort for those who treat them cruelly. It's worth pointing out that utilitarianism has a bit more depth to it than that, and it was a pretty common misunderstanding that it all just came down to a greater good rhetoric. Frederick Rosen once characterized this as a crude version of utilitarianism conceived in the 20th century as a straw man to be attacked and rejected. A form which takes utilitarians purely as stone-cold machine men. Appropriately, Asher, if pressed, refutes this characterization. By his metric, his community is not just one that benefits from the utility of slave labour, but requires it for any hope of survival and future happiness. This is not the kind of slave trade we might understand from our own history, one based more so on simply maximising our own tycoon profiteering. This is not a choice between cruelty or discomfort, but cruelty or death. The troglodyte disease swoops over all. Like killing possibly infected livestock, it's a choice between butchery or absolute doom. But can cruelty always be justified by an ultimately positive outcome? Well, as I said, with our recent history of dealing with slavery, I think few in the modern day would really see it that way. And certainly Werner, the rebel who first hires you, does not agree with that mindset.
I think I speak for all of the ex-slaves here when I say, good riddance to those bastards. May they rot in a glowing grave.
The slaves should be free, and it's after that point that the community can work as a united force to protect themselves from the troglodyte horde. But then, of course, we go back to the baby. You see, the trick is that if you oppose the spirit of utilitarianism, if you wholly oppose the notion that cruelty can be justified by positive end results, you can't take the baby. As Asher and his wife make clear both in conversation and research notes, this is a child born and raised in a loving, caring home. Sandra is a highly skilled researcher and is doing as much as possible to ensure comfort and delicacy to her child, even as she runs various tests to see if her immunity to the disease can be duplicated. It is, in many ways, the perfect setup for the child. By contrast, you're giving this child up to a vengeful rebel clan you know very little about. Not only are you ripping this child from a safe and loving home, you're doing so by exposing it to a group you know very little about, a group that could very well kill the kid outright in the name of revenge, or do far more rigorous experimentation without regard for the child's comfort. This is an act of utility. It's an explicit rejection of the rights of the child in favour of fulfilling some greater sense of justice. The choice hardener in this case being not only that doing this requires taking the baby, but brutally slaughtering both the kid's mother and father. Even if you run away from them initially, the end of the revolt will culminate in a confrontation with them. There's no turning back here. It's all or nothing. If pressed, Asher makes it clear that his intentions are ultimately noble. He strongly believes that once a cure can be cultivated, he will have no reason to keep the slaves and will free them as soon as possible. It must be pointed out that his research setup is easily the best available in the pit. In all likelihood, freeing the slaves might even delay the process of cultivating a cure by years, even if the rebels are able to establish a comparable research team. Yet still, is it worth it? Does Asher really have the right to declare on behalf of these proles that their freedom, their comfort, their relative safety is not worth consideration in the face of his own greater good? Well, that's the thing. If you want to take the kid, that's something you're deciding yourself. You're deciding on behalf of this child that its own safety and comfort are not worth upholding a regime that makes you deeply uncomfortable. This is extended to any raiders you meet along the way who seem more sympathetic to the others, those who are more victims of circumstance than outright monsters. After all, most of those in Asher's inner circle are ex-slaves who have themselves fought their way to the top through merit. Obviously, they're also going to fight back if you declare war against Asher by taking the kid. They die too, for the greater good. Bear in mind your mileage may vary based on where you draw the line in the limits of personal responsibility. Sure, basically all of these above individuals go hostile on you first, but what? Do you expect a group of bodyguards not to try and stop you if you run out with the cure? Do you expect a mother not to go for a gun when you decide to kidnap her child?
Whether or not you're instigating the direct gunfight, you're still in a way instigating the conflict as a whole. It all factors in, to varying degrees.
This decision ultimately places us between the ideas of revolution and reform, and part of what hit me so hard is that this is a dilemma I personally grapple with quite a lot. Admittedly, I really find it hard to pin down my own line for the point at which it can be called necessary to inflict pain or cruelty in the name of a greater purpose, as I'm sure many of you do also. When is it okay to punch Nazis? And when is it okay to shoot Nazis in the head? Would they be instigating purely by nature of their inherently genocidal beliefs, even if they claim non-violence? The fact that I'd near universally side with the oppressed over those that oppress them doesn't mean I always feel 100% confident in my righteousness, and it feels important to hold on to that. When is it okay to harm those who implicitly defend Nazis without realizing that they're doing so? And when is it okay to harm those who unknowingly act to reinforce a system that you personally believe is causing great existential harm to many? I believe, personally, that action can often be necessary to enact a positive change, and we have to be ready to do that. But I just can't block out that those actions often run totally and completely counter to my own personal beliefs in how we should treat one another. In my view, compassion is key. It's what my whole moral framework is based around. We should try to do as little harm to one another as possible, and ensure that as many people as possible live comfortable and satisfied. It's a belief I feel I'm not alone in holding, even if various gross humanitarian injustices are currently going on, which makes me think otherwise at times.
But then there's that paradox of tolerance again. How can we tolerate people who fuel intolerance in others? Well, maybe if I care about compassion, I shouldn't do that, and that's kind of a paradox in its own way that I need to content myself with.
I chose revolution. I chose to take the child. I played the numbers game, realizing that whatever harm I possibly caused this child and the smattering of well-meaning individuals among Asher's upper caste was worth the risk to remove Asher's one great bargaining chip for maintaining his brutal regime. I played the numbers game with the lives of the innocent, and I felt terrible. A softener does come to the player, whatever choice they ultimately make. Once you completely dismantle Asher's old system, it becomes clear that Werner and the Rebel clan do genuinely care about the well-being of the Cure child. In fact, on your leave, they beckon you to hurry back if you find any toys for young Marie to play with. If you leave the kid with Asher and help him quash that meddlesome rebellion, he assures you that the experience has given him pause for consideration, and he'll be working harder than ever to ensure the cure is cultivated so the workers can be free. All this, yet, in both cases, you leave the pit uneasy. There's still much work to be done, no matter who's in charge. There's no cure yet, the city is still an irradiated waste, and who knows which side would succeed. All you have to go on is your own convictions, whether you feel what you did was right. Thankfully, Bethesda made the call this time not to set an explicit good or bad karma for either route. It's all on you. Now, I think in the real world it's very rare that these kinds of binary choices are given, and in fairness to Fallout 3, there are a few nuances to the process that change things a bit. For instance, you can choose to take the baby and then change your mind, which does further shake Asher to consider freeing the slaves, but still doesn't result him in doing so. That said, I've seen complaints about this being such an all or nothing choice that I do think are legitimate takes. As I stressed earlier, I think there's nuance in all of us that puts us each somewhere in the middle as far as how far is too far, when it's time to act when something unjust is taking place. I'm actually genuinely uncomfortable when I read comments calling this choice easy, because it seems to speak either to you being totally uncomfortable with ever standing up for the rights of an oppressed group, or on the flip side, totally fine with whatever you might need to do to push your own ideological goals. If you consider this choice easy, but don't think either of those appropriately characterize you, I would love to hear your thoughts about all this. Finally, I want to point out that the difficulty of a choice does not necessarily point to its quality as a decision. I think there's a lot more to it, and in many ways Bethesda's dependence on singular hard binary choices rather than smaller nuanced decisions over the course of a whole campaign is another big reason fans so dislike the route they've taken with the franchise.
Still, from the moment I sat there with the controller in my hand for a solid 20 minutes trying to figure out if I did the right thing or not, I knew this was a moment that was worth flagging up.
Again, maybe I'm partially influenced by how emblematic everything before this choice felt of exactly what I didn't like about Bethesda's take on Fallout. Mindless shooting and a paper-thin world, never really challenging your beliefs on a deeper philosophical level. But in this moment, I was playing a real role again. I was making a pivotal decision based on my own system of beliefs. The Messiah-like role often given to you in RPGs, particularly those in more recent days, plays an interesting role in the context of working out our own deeper philosophies. It's common, in posing these kinds of societal questions, that we're being placed in the hypothetical role of one who could make singular decisions which effectively change the world around us, a role that in our personal lives is rarely actually possible. Video games give us the rare opportunity to embody that role, and I think that's why we're seeing so much more discourse nowadays revolving around ethics and politics as they relate to games.
Even if the real world rarely says it's time to make a choice, we always are, even if that's just projecting what we think we believe to others.
That's the trick of reflecting on those ideals, and that's the trick of the Pit. To figure out how far, really, you're willing to go for what you believe. There's been an increasing rift in the Fallout fanbase between those on board with the new direction of Fallout and those that desperately want to see a return to Kane's original vision of a more rounded and thoughtful apocalyptic world. The announcement of Fallout 76 I don't think could possibly have done a better job of furthering that divide, as it appears to be absolutely nothing but the shooty bang bang amusement park wasteland Todd and company have envisioned as the future of the franchise. To my understanding, it doesn't even have non-player characters, let alone meaningful choices or quest lines. So amidst this hard, in many ways justified swing against what Bethesda is doing with the franchise, I hope I've done a good job of highlighting at least one thing that genuinely impressed me. Last week we absolutely exploded in patrons, something that makes me so happy because it indicates, yes, maybe there's some value in what I'm doing. I'd like to thank Alba, Andrew Kowalski, Kristen Roars, Nick Schwert, did I say it right this time? Owen Mateson, Peter Coffin, and Vrishna Giras. Brit's going to be heading back to college at the end of the month, so we may need to start investing in new electronics, since otherwise we're splitting custody of the work laptop. If anyone wants to contribute to that and help keep the show going, please don't hesitate to chip in over at Patreon, and if not, like, subscribe, share this video around, all of that stuff helps so much. As ever, thanks so much for watching, love you all, and keep up the good fight.